By most measures, Red Dead Redemption 2 is an amazing title. It has extremely impressive graphics even when not considering the game's scale and depth. It has a well-paced dynamic story with remarkably good character development, and the world space is extremely well crafted with elegant segues and transitions from one landscape into another. The gunplay is still pretty terrible, but in terms of both quality and quantity, the content to dollar ratio is really only rivaled by The Witcher 3 and previous Rockstar titles. Thus, the men and women at Rockstar Games, no matter what my opinions are on other facets of their game, definitely deserve a lot of praise for their technological and artistic achievement here. Rockstar is famous for its use of centrist satire when exploring the gray areas of American life, but Red Dead Redemption 2 often seems to trend toward a kind of moral particularism and nihilistic defeatism. While Rockstar has never claimed absolute historical accuracy in any game they've developed, Dan Houser called Red Dead Redemption 2, quote, an interactive homage to the American rural experience, unquote. But honestly, to me, the game came off more as an indictment than it did a homage. The game definitely has its moments, like John's proposal to Abigail in the epilogue, but the overwhelming sense I got was that America was built on a foundation of moral hypocrisy and corruption. In a Vulture magazine article, Harold Goldberg quotes Dan Houser saying that, despite its classical influences, Red Dead Redemption 2 isn't meant to be just a period piece. As most movie westerns reflect the era of their making, Dan says he hopes the game speaks to the present, quote, elliptically, but not literally. You know, we don't have this person meant to be like Donald Trump and this person like Barack Obama. It's more this sensation that we found interesting in the 19th century that spoke to us, and I hope it speaks to people about today's problems, unquote. Now, to Dan's credit, there aren't any direct ties in the game to a particular modern figure. However, there are definitely ties to modern perspectives within modern political movements, like feminism, the alt-right, and neo-Marxism. Without a doubt, these movements can trace their roots back to this era, but Red Dead Redemption 2 often uses these roots to comment elliptically, but not literally, on modern politics, and not in a very impartial way. The story takes place in 1899 and centers on a gang of criminal outlaws led by an idealistic leader, Dutch van der Linde, a northern man with a deep-seated hatred of the South. In some ways, Dutch is a proto-communist insofar that he insists on taking from the rich and redistributing their wealth to himself and whomever he deems worthy. But in his mind, he's a freedom fighter, not a criminal.
They're gonna let a bunch of criminals go after what we've done.
We are not criminals. We are outlaws.
There's a difference?
Of course there is a goddamn difference, and when you figure out what that is, you'll know what the hell we're doing.
The gang has a diverse cast of characters: men, women, blacks, whites, a Mexican, and even a black Indian mulatto. The protagonist is a 35-year-old man named Arthur Morgan, who was raised by Dutch from the time he was about 15. Thus, the two men have a semi-father-son relationship. The plot is essentially an unraveling of the gang's cohesion as they continually flee the Pinkerton Detective Agency, whom Rockstar, interestingly, portrays as villainous relative to the van der Linde gang. As time goes on though, Arthur slowly begins questioning both his surrogate father's motivations and the life he's led as a criminal. Near the outset, Arthur unknowingly contracts tuberculosis after he beats up an infected man from whom he was collecting a debt. The insinuated poetic justice is that usury is evil and that karma caught up with him. While the player can have an impact on how the world develops, it's only to a point. Arthur will always get sick, question his life choices, help his fellow gang member John Marston escape with his wife and child, and then he'll die. On the surface, it's a story about a man on a path to redemption, but the rabbit hole goes deeper. There's a revealing conversation between Arthur and Rainsfall, an Indian chief in the game, that potentially reveals the major theme of the Red Dead series.
It took a long time for me to learn that you could never change a person. We only become more who we really are.
Some would view this as an insinuation that Arthur Morgan was really a good man after all because he eventually died helping others. Thus, he became more of who he was originally. But who was Arthur originally? He didn't start out his life like this, and how many people did he end up killing in order to quote-unquote help others? How many of his fellow citizens did he betray as he went around robbing, murdering, and stealing? Likewise, Dutch van der Linde started out as a 2-bit criminal, and in the end, he betrayed his supposed ideals and morals for self-gain while he abandoned his surrogate family. If we pan back and look at Red Dead Redemption 2 from a bird's eye view and examine what it's most critical of, The game is commenting on American identity just as much as it's commenting on Arthur Morgan and Dutch van der Linde as individuals. While the game definitely has some politically incorrect moments, there's also a fair amount of virtue signaling that many gamers might have missed. At first I had some real sympathy for Sadie Adler since she lost her husband and home to a gang of murderous thieves. But as the story progresses, her behavior becomes more and more reminiscent of modern notions of female liberation. She throws a temper tantrum with Pearson, the camp cook, when he asks her to help prepare vegetables, as if this was beneath her or somehow sexist. Arthur takes her aside and listens to her rant about how she and her dead husband shared all the work on their homestead. Arthur could have pointed out to her that Pearson himself was a man doing the same work as her, or that the rest of the women in the camp really didn't have any issues sewing, washing dishes, or doing menial tasks. But instead, he concedes to her righteous indignation and takes her into town with him on some errands. Along the way, Sadie opens and reads one of Pearson's letters and proceeds to make fun of him and emasculate his character.
Dear Aunt Kathy,
You are something else.
I haven't heard from you in some time, so I pray to the Lord above that your health has not deteriorated further. Blah, blah, blah. It's boring. Ooh. Wait a sec. Listen to this. Since we last corresponded, I have traveled widely, making no small name for myself. Before you ask, I am still yet to take a wife, but I can assure you it's not for a lack of suitors. You ever actually even talk to a woman he ain't paid for?
Oh, look. We're all hiding behind something.
Maybe I could have chalked this up to her simply being spiteful and overbearing, or that it was Rockstar's way of making fun of her. But at one point in the game, when the gang's camp is under attack, Sadie can be seen taking on not one, not two, but 3 armed men in hand-to-hand combat, as if a sassy attitude could overcome body weight, higher testosterone levels, denser bone mass and muscle fiber, or the use of firearms. Most fans will claim that Arthur Morgan is a well-crafted fence-sitter, never really taking a stance on any issue. In some instances, he even appears to be critical of feminism.
So I've graduated from chopping vegetables to shopping?
Shut your goddamn mouth.
You, my friend, what do you think about women's suffrage?
Women voting? Sure, why not?
Oh, thank you, sir. You are a true progressive.
Anyone dumb enough to want to vote, I say go for it. How much you cost, anyway?
Ain't that a nice way to talk to a lady?
Oh, I didn't know I was talking to a lady.
Excuse me.
Overall though, I would say Arthur Morgan takes a pro-feminist stance more often than not, if you know where to look within the game.
Mr. Morgan, I give you the male of the species.
That's a pretty dumb specimen, I grant it.
What do you think about women, Mr. Arthur?
I don't think there's much difference between women and men. Most of both are awful.
How's your friend getting on with those new clothes? Not something a lady should be wearing, in my opinion, but each to their own, I suppose.
I'd be very surprised if you had a lady, my friend.
Well, not right now, but I've had my share.
Interestingly, Roger Clark, the voice actor for Arthur, had this to say in an online interview. Quote, "I wanted to bring across a certain vulnerability to Arthur, which is something I don't think Westerns have addressed as much as they possibly could have. When we think of the genre, we think of the strong, masculine protagonist, and I think it's important to show that there's a definite vulnerability to the male ego, to male characters. And I think we might get a lot less toxic masculinity if we address that men are fragile too, or at least as capable of being vulnerable and scared," unquote. Now, do I think that Arthur was portrayed as feminine? No, he's pretty alpha actually. But he repeatedly praises Mrs. Adler's disagreeable nature and encourages her downward spiral into the very kind of supposed toxic masculinity that Roger Clark thinks he was addressing in his performance. The game quite bizarrely celebrates Sadie Adler's descent into a psychotic break and pawns it off as female liberation. The Overton window in gaming has been pushed so far toward female inclusion recently that even Rockstar is beginning to concede ground. Take note of the mission The Noblest of Men and a Woman, wherein Arthur is tasked with finding and interviewing various legendary gunslingers. Both the white male gunslingers turn out to be cowards who lied about their exploits, while the Mexican is practically dripping with testosterone, and the woman, Black Belle, is arguably the toughest of them all. Now, this is not to say that there were no female gunslingers or outlaws, but they were exceedingly rare, and the only reason the press picked up on them at the time was because they were exceedingly rare. Another noteworthy moment was when Arthur Morgan met a black doctor whose wagon was stolen by racist whites. Without pause, he drops everything he's doing and gets to work retrieving the stolen wagon, while giving angry commentary about the injustice of it all. The thing is, by this point, Arthur had beaten a farmer in front of his wife, robbed a train full of his fellow citizens on vacation, stolen some cowboy sheep, killed half the town of Strawberry and Valentine in various shootouts, and robbed the grave of an old lady. Yet, for some odd reason, Arthur had an issue with a random black man being robbed of his wagon because according to his bizarre moral code, a life of crime is totally permissible as long as you don't target victims based on race.
You okay there, mister?
You need me to move?
Move?
Am I sitting in the wrong place?
Excuse me?
No, I didn't mean any offense, sir. Please.
I don't get your meaning.
I'm very sorry, sir. You have yourself a fine day, and I apologize for any offense I may have inadvertently caused.
What are you drinking, mister?
Nothing, sir. Nothing at all.
Why are you acting so strange?
I don't mean to. I'm sorry for any offense.
How could you have offended me?
I have no idea. But I had no idea how I offended the last fellas. And they stole my wagon on account of my impudence.
Stole your wagon for back check?
They didn't like my medical practice, I suppose. I was helping folk.
That wasn't popular?
I was undercutting the competition. Or I was too colored. Or I was irritating in nature. Or I was some know-it-all, big city slicker-head to demean some good old boys of my fine words. The exact variety of my sins was the source of some conjecture, so they undercut me.
That ain't very nice.
That was my impression. Still, compared to the gutting, castration, defenestration, and crucifixion they offered me, I felt I got off lightly.
Imaginative bunch.
Yes.
But
no great love for my medical practice. Too free with my wisdom and services.
which way they go?
Down the road, that way.
Stay here.
I'm sort of forced to.
This scene is fairly over the top. Sure, white Southerners have historically not been kind to colored folk, but the writers overdid the whole "I'm sorry for any offense I may have caused" bit. I understand that they were going for a comedic caricaturization of the mistreatment of blacks in the Jim Crow era, but Arthur would have at least been somewhat familiar with what the Doctor's overly apologetic behavior was alluding to. Granted, Arthur's from the Southwest and not the Deep South, but it's still a little odd that he's entirely unaware of the concept of Southern bigotry against blacks. Later on, Lenny Summers even has to explain the very concept to him while they're on a mission to rob a Lemoyne Raider outpost. This scene was a really cheesy way to show how colorblind Arthur is and how virtuous he is for it. This wasn't about exploring the black experience in the South or anything else. It was poorly done virtue signaling that gave players some bad white people to shoot at later. Here's something else to consider. In 1900, about 90% of the African American population lived in the South, and only about 1% of the total black population was employed as professionals. The reason I bring this up is because the Doctor in this scene speaks of having angered the locals because he was, quote, undercutting the competition. This is an extremely odd thing to assert though, given the context. Most white folks in the South at the time wouldn't even give a colored barber their business, let alone a colored doctor. Moreover, bearing in mind the previous statistical figures, there would have been roughly 8 million potential black clients for 90,000 black professionals, not all of whom were doctors. The reality is that this colored fellow, being the intelligent man that he is, would have no reason to assume the risks of attempting to provide his services to the racist, unwelcoming citizens of Rhodes when he had a giant untapped market of African Americans elsewhere. The game's writers throughout the story make it abundantly clear that it's wrong to discriminate based on race, but what's interesting is that they often do so while repeatedly discriminating against the entire white Southern population. And by the end of the story, Dutch's motley crew has practically genocided the O'Driscolls, the Braithwaites, and the Greys.
Nothing but nasty, miserable people.
Yeah?
Yeah, ever since them Greys moved here, you bunch of no-good white trash.
You have finally lost your mind. Amongst these drunkards, hillbillies, and slavers? Good honest thieves like us. We're bound to be moralizers in a place like this. Oh, Sheriff Gray, you are back.
This old crap. Huh?
Thanks. Don't you understand? Those bastards, they changed everything. I was a good worker. I took pride in my work. They took it away. Pissed on my legacy.
Old man, some jobs ain't for saving. We're thieves in a world that don't want us no more. And some legacies,
Oh,
they are for pissing
what
on.
are you doing? That's my history. Ah! God. Damn you! Damn you! I still exist! Oh.
We ain't leaving till this bag's full. I ain't got nothing. You wanna have a little chat with Romeo and Juliet here?
I don't want to get...
What's the problem here?
I'll do anything.
So, what do you think?
About what?
Fine folks around these parts.
Oh, real nice.
Exactly. On the one side, we have got the Gray family. Scots, degenerates, drunkards, the local law. You couldn't make this stuff up. Rich as Croesus. And on the other, their mortal enemies, the Braithwaites. Moonshiners, hypocritical, both rolling, we believe,
In gold. And in the middle of it all, you got some inbred retelling of Romeo and Juliet.
Exactly.
The game also repeatedly uses instances of spoken racial bigotry as a means to justify physical violence. For example, when an NPC needs to be dispatched, they often make some offhand racist comment before the player is instructed to kill them.
Listen, why don't you get out of here? You, Scarface, and your greaser buddy.
Whoa!
I don't like officials.
Greaser, huh?
I cannot believe someone gave a greaser a job.
We live in strange times.
Next, we'll be hiring Negroes.
I know. I guess you were right. Only an idiot would give a greaser a gun.
Idiot, huh? Did you fools shoot those bison? Calm down, you black or red bastard, whatever the fuck you are. Did you shoot them? Yes, we did. We shot them bison, we'll shoot you too if you don't get. What business is it of yours? What? It's that business of mine! Good God, you're crazy!
Another red flag for me in the game was the introduction of the character Charles Smith, with whom the player is supposed to sympathize because his father was a freed slave and his mother was an Indian. Charles Smith, to me, is a case of Rockstar trying to check too many victimhood boxes. Sure, there were definitely cases of Africans miscegenating with natives, but what Red Dead Redemption 2's story will never allude to is that many Indian tribes held slaves themselves until after the Civil War. The game insinuates through Charles' backstory that all Native Americans saw Africans as their equals, and that it was really only white folks who didn't.
You know, Dutch is different.
Oh, yes. Dutch is certainly different.
He treats me fair. Most of you do. And for a fellow with a black father and an Indian mother, that ain't normally the case. My father was a colored man. He told me he lived with our people for a while. A number of free men did, but when we were forced to move from our lands, the three of us fled. I was too young to really remember much. My whole life I've been on the run. A couple years later, some soldiers captured my mother. Took her somewhere. We never saw her again. We drifted around. He was a very sad man, and the drink had a mean hold on him. Around 13, I just took off on my own.
The reality is that, just as there was disagreement within the white American community about the place of Africans within society, the same held true for Native Americans. In fact, to this very day, many people of mixed African-Native ancestry are not considered true Native Americans by some tribes. The second red flag with Charles was when he invites Arthur on a bison hunting trip, and he has a brief monologue about how his people lived as one with the bison, even going so far as to insist that he and Arthur should kill only one and no more. Shortly thereafter, though, they stumble upon two white men who've been killing multiple bison and leaving their corpses to rot. When confronted, the two men reveal that they were actually hired to do this and to blame it on the natives.
What the hell are you doing? Why are you killing those bison and leaving them to rot?
I don't know what you're talking about.
God damn it, tell us or you're dead.
Oh, okay. We were paid to kill as many as we could and make it look like it was Indians.
Just kill him, Arthur.
No, please, don't kill me. I'm begging you.
All right, now get out of here.
Just don't shoot me, mister. I got a family.
And run away. Why did you do that? He didn't need to die. Maybe he'll go tell his friends now what happens to poachers. I've seen enough of this. I'm heading back. Okay. I'm gonna see if there's anything worth taking from their camp. I'll catch up with you later.
We're trying to reform society to a kinder, truer, better way. Now, of course, there's gonna be casualties.
We ain't your idea of charity. Is that clear?
The game appears to want the player to take this scene seriously as some grave injustice and to use it to elevate the moral standing of Charles and Arthur. But Arthur and Charles rob, cheat, and murder people for a living. How exactly are they morally superior to these two men? Now, I realize that Charles himself points out their gang's own hypocrisy on several occasions, but to me, it appears that this was a cheap mechanism by which Rockstar was attempting to have its cake and eat it too. Moreover, the game promotes a legendary animal hunting system revolving around killing the most rare of animal species in the region, not to mention that Arthur himself leaves the corpses of animals behind to rot after killing them. I suppose this was due to development limitations, but still, the bison hunting mission came off as a heavy-handed virtue signal from someone who watched Dances with Wolves way too many times and never considered any other sides of the story. Box burning was a common tactic used by Native Americans to hunt bison that involved setting simultaneous fires on all four sides of a herd. American historian Larry Schweikart recounts that some folks traveling the plains in 1804 observed entire herds charred from Indian fires. Another strategy employed by natives was the buffalo jump, which involved luring a herd after an Indian dressed in a buffalo skin. Once the herd was at full speed, the man would lead the herd to a cliff and leap to a small ledge, while the buffalo careened over the edge to their deaths. Both strategies led to extreme waste and inefficient use of resources. Schweikart writes, quote, "Estimates made in the 1850s suggest that Indians harvested about 450,000 animals a year, and some think the figure was far higher than that. After stripping the best meat and some useful parts, the Indians left the remainder to rot. The stench permeated the prairie for miles, and many a pioneer came across acres of bones from buffalo killed by the Indians before they moved on." Unquote. While Europeans definitely overhunted the bison, one of the reasons the bison are still around today is because the American government classified them as a protected species, and they created reservations for them. Now, this is not to say that Europeans didn't do anything wrong here. General Sherman was particularly pragmatic and brutal in his push to subdue the natives, and he encouraged policies that would reduce the number of bison in the plains as a direct means of undermining the ability of Indians to resist Western expansion. However, he used the very same brutal pragmatic tactics in his decimation of the southern population during the Civil War, and yet pop culture only seems to demonize him for the former, not the latter. The very same military force that is often praised for the destruction of the Confederacy was almost immediately turned around onto the Native American population and the bison in the West. Again though, some scholars today believe that the American bison were already on a trajectory toward extinction even had the US not begun expanding further west. Droughts had historically kept the southern plains mostly free of bison between 500 and 1300 AD. And during the 19th century, droughts of more than 5 years' duration struck the Great Plains 4 times at roughly 20-year intervals. During this same time, Native Americans had begun using horses and modern firearms to hunt the bison with increasing efficacy, and the very introduction of horses to the Indian Plains cultures most likely caused sustainability problems for the bison, as millions of horses fed on the same prairie grass and drank from the same water sources as them. All of this happened on top of any US Army policy in the second half of the 19th century. Thus, the demise of the American bison probably should not be reduced to any one factor, and most likely warrants a more nuanced and detailed discussion and analysis. Moreover, I don't think we learn anything from history when we reduce the Indian Wars to a one-dimensional affair wherein only the Europeans are considered the aggressors. The Plains Indians themselves had been fighting with each other over this region for centuries. This is not a justification for the fate that befell their glorious cultures, but let's be honest, had they been able to kill off all the Europeans or halt their expansion, they probably would have done so without mercy. In a separate attempt to avoid depicting Native Americans negatively, Red Dead Redemption 2 uses the Skinner Gang during John Marston's epilogue to replace Native American violence against settlers on the frontier. It would have been politically incorrect to depict any facet of Native American behavior negatively, but since the writers probably still wanted to portray some of the savagery of the West and the frontier, they just pretended that there were gangs of dirty old white men running around taking scalps and burning folk alive. While I'm an admirer of Plains Indian culture, these people were not innocent of any wrongdoing. The Cheyenne, for example, often captured white female settlers and used them as prostitutes. One such account is of Catherine German and her sisters. In 1874, her family, originally from Georgia, was camped in western Kansas while in transit to Colorado. Just moments after breaking camp, the family was surprised by Indians. Within minutes, the wagon was in flames. The mother, father, and 3 older siblings, Rebecca, Johanna, and Stephen, were killed and scalped. Catherine and her 3 sisters, Sophia, 12, and little Julia and Addie, aged 7 and 5 respectively, were then carried off. Catherine and her sister Sophia were repeatedly raped during their captivity. Both were traded back and forth from one brave to the next, with their worth being measured in horses. Their experience was not uncommon either, yet you'll rarely hear about it or others like it in any mainstream accounting of Native American behavior. Here's another example of Red Dead Redemption 2's bias. When Arthur encounters a US Army defector who owes Leopold Strauss money, he's very mean and belligerent at first, until he sees that the man has a Native American wife. Then his heart softens and the game gives you the opportunity to absolve his debt. So, for some reason, miscegenation is the key to Arthur's heart.
If we could just have more.
Like I said, we ain't nobody's idea of charity. Get us the money.
This scene also leads players to believe, once again, that Native Americans were totally fine with men from outgroups taking their women as brides. Also, interestingly, for all Arthur knows, this fellow could have kidnapped this woman, not unlike Charles Smith's mother was kidnapped by American soldiers when he was a child. The game also massages the theme of European exploitation of the environment. There's a dynamic logging site that evolves as the player progresses through the story. At the outset, it's full of trees and bustling with human activity. By the end of the game, though, it's completely barren. The sentiment the player is left with is how horrible exploitation was in the American frontier, which in many ways it was, but pop culture for the last several decades has relentlessly demonized the historical actions of Europeans in this regard, while falsely promoting all indigenous peoples of the world as saintly custodians of Mother Nature, and I've grown quite tired of it. The natives of Easter Island literally cut down all its trees, and yet most of us know Easter Island for its amazing statues and the rich cultural history of its people, not its environmental exploitation. The Aborigines of Australia permanently changed much of the continent's landscape by burning down forests and underbrush, and yet most of us know Aborigines for their didgeridoos and boomerangs, not their environmental exploitation. Most of the pollution in the ocean today comes from a handful of rivers in third world nations, and yet it's mostly white people who are encouraged to have fewer children to save the planet, while third worlders continue to have unprecedented amounts of babies, which European technology and modern medicine have allowed to thrive. Evelyn Miller, a fictional writer in the game, even ends up killing himself over some kind of warped sense of guilt and confusion about European ideals conflicting with the natural wonder of the great American landscape. Speaking of a European committing suicide because of guilt tied to his ethnic identity, here's Lenny Summers recounting a story of how his father obtained his previous slave master's watch.
Now, it wasn't the master of the house, who my father loved, in a way, but his brother, whom my father hated with an almighty passion. He beat the slaves almost nightly, whip them, rape them. One night, my father was getting a whooping for the crime of being born by this horrible bastard when his sister-in-law, the master's wife, walks in. Now, fearing for my father's life, she told her brother-in-law to stop. Well, not only did he not stop, he beat her too. Next day, his brother, the master, shot him dead. The whole plantation cheered. The master gave my father his dead brother's watch and told him as he did so, time will catch up with us all. A year later, he set them free and hanged himself the very next night.
Go away. Just go away.
I'm sorry. I'm really sorry, but well,
you're sorry. Yeah, I heard you.
But, I mean, well,
At one point in the game, a US Army colonel is vilified for withholding vaccines from the natives sent by the federal government. And once again, they depict Arthur as somehow morally solvent by making him display how upset he is about it. Again though, Arthur at this point has killed God knows how many of his fellow citizens, and for some reason, he suddenly cares about Native Americans dying from smallpox.
Colonel Favors seems to think the natives have broken some promise they never made. Apparently he's punishing them by withholding vaccines sent down by the federal government.
Really?
I was supposed to oversee the administration of vaccines. Now I hear the wagon's been diverted.
Why would he do such a thing?
To be honest, I truly don't know. They say he didn't have a very good war, so maybe he's trying to start another one.
Is that what you think?
I'm trying to find out. He knows I'm trying to find out. He'd love to provoke me almost as much as he'd love to provoke these poor bastards.
Meaning?
Meaning that despite the fact that I think he's a horse's ass, he knows I think that. So we're just stuck here trying to make the best of things.
This is the best of things. Children dying of diseases. Either you got a lazy eye or lack of respect. Which is it, boy?
I ain't got no lazy eye. No respect for the likes of you.
Well, maybe when your mother's finished mourning your father, I'll keep her in black on your behalf.
Later on, in the mission The Fine Art of Conversation, the US Army is further reduced to a one-dimensional caricature of historic treaty violations with the Indians. The colonel even makes comically overt insults to Rainsfall. Arthur overhears a plot to arrest and hang the only captain who's been an ally to the natives, and after this, you help the guy escape while killing countless army soldiers, all of whom we're to assume are evil, I guess, because the general said some mean things to a native. The game also takes some jabs at one of the greatest European inventors of all time. At the outset of the side mission, a bright bouncing boy, Marko Dragic, a proxy for the real-life Serbian-American scientist Nikola Tesla, demonstrates his remote-controlled boat to a potential investor in Saint Denis, and at one point, a man resembling Thomas Edison, Tesla's real-life rival, heckles Dragic, claiming that he's a fraud. This is clearly a reference to the current wars between Edison and Tesla in which they argued over AC and DC power supplies. The writers at Rockstar Games repeatedly jest at Tesla's overall character and depict him as rude and egotistical, as despising and looking down on his adopted American home, and as a sniffling manipulator out to swindle investors.
Fantastic. You Americans are nothing but shysters and traitors and slippery-tongued bull suckers.
I'm inclined to agree.
Still, the investors will not come. Just a couple of old ladies and a moron.
Ladies, please.
Ladies! Gentlemen! Enchanté. Hello. Hello, sir.
The scene where Dragic demonstrates his radio-operated boat actually took place in Madison Square Garden, and was witnessed by quite a very large crowd of spectators who were so awestruck by Tesla's boat that some believed there was a monkey inside that was trained to pilot it. Tesla toyed with the onlookers by instructing them to ask the boat questions like, "What is the cube root of 64?" and then he would flash the answers with lights attached to it. However, the scene in Red Dead depicts Dragic as actually believing that the boat itself truly possessed some kind of basis for life. At first, I figured this was Rockstar's way of portraying Tesla's real-life prank, but eventually an observer asks Dragic if he has military applications in mind for his toy boat, and he replies very seriously that the boat is the, quote, transmigration of the soul. In real life, Tesla indeed intended his technology for military use, and I highly doubt that he actually thought of radio wave operation as the transmigration of the soul. The writers also placed some very odd notes in the guy's laboratory, suggesting that his real-life goal was to take over the world with automatons. Haha, I guess. Now, Tesla was certainly a very strange fellow, as are most highly creative geniuses with adactic memories, but he was probably one of the very few true philanthropists we've ever seen, especially in the robber baron age. Despite his inventions and ideas having revolutionized civilization and making everyone around him extremely wealthy, Tesla died an extremely poor man while still dreaming of providing the world with limitless energy. It's quite interesting that Rockstar poked fun at him when their company literally would not exist without his contributions to the modern world, and when they themselves nickel and dime consumers with various microtransactions. What's also odd about Rockstar's jabs at Tesla is that the game includes an entire mission on the invention of the electric chair, and the writers all but openly declare how immoral the concept was. Seeing how Thomas Edison funded the electric chair's development and recommended that it use an alternating current instead of direct current method, it would have been more fitting to take some jabs at Edison rather than Tesla. Edison was privately against capital punishment, but had been electrocuting animals publicly using alternating current in hopes that it would tarnish the reputation of Tesla and his partner Westinghouse. In any event, the electric chair may arguably be immoral, as may be capital punishment in the modern era. However, depicting the real-life inventor of the electric chair, as Rockstar did, is not fair or accurate. Alfred P. Southwick, the real-life dentist who came up with the idea, did so after observing various linemen being killed by high voltages while working on electric street lamps. These men had been rendered unconscious and killed pretty much instantaneously. Thus, Southwick saw the potential for a more humane method of execution than hanging, which in some instances could take up to 30 minutes to kill an individual if the proper calculations were not made to snap their neck after falling. Now, it's true that the first electric chair execution didn't go very well, but William Kemmler, convicted of murdering his wife with an axe, was rendered entirely unconscious after the first passage of 1,000 volts. While subsequent attempts were necessary to stop his heart and the damage done to his body was pretty gruesome, the man was not conscious for any of it. Essentially, Rockstar is making fun of Southwick and his colleagues for their arguable ignorance and diluted senses of morality with the advantage of 2020 hindsight. Perhaps this is because they're against capital punishment. That would be odd though, since the entire game is centered around the player dispensing their own capital punishment using various means of violence. Sure, the game often rewards the player with karma points for sparing people's lives, but there are entire missions that revolve around and force the player to kill people in revenge. It's easy to view Rockstar's narrative as being focused on the moral ambiguity of life, but in reality, the game has its own sense of justice, and it's not very impartial. There are times when the karma system tacitly approves violence by simply not punishing the player for it. For example, the player can kill Lemoyne Raiders and members of the KKK, typically without losing any karma. Now, say what you want about whom you deem racists, bigots, and xenophobes, but they all have a right to live and be left alone so long as they do likewise. Moreover, the Vanderlyn gang is honestly no better than the Lemoyne Raiders. Both go around stealing from people they think owe them something, and then they redistribute the wealth as they see fit. Now, a while back I tweeted out a series of comments about Red Dead's depiction of the KKK, and I'd like to highlight here that I got some things wrong. Technically, after Nathan Bedford Forrest called for its disbandment in 1870, the Klan's numbers did decline, and they didn't rise again until 1915 when it was revived by William Joseph Simmons. Rockstar was correct insofar that the numbers in 1899 were declining. Hell, the Klan was practically non-existent then. However, Rockstar's depiction of the Klan as a marginal organization full of self-mutilating retards gives players the impression that Southern society at the time was becoming more progressive. But this conflicts with Rockstar's other simultaneous narrative of a backward, racist, white Southern population. Remember how Sam Houser said that he wanted to comment on the present elliptically but not literally? Well, this is what he's doing here in scenes like this. He's using a kind of historical ellipsis to state that modern white identitarians are marginal idiots, becoming increasingly irrational as a post-racial society moves on without them. In any event, the Klan wasn't full of stupid men, and it doesn't do anyone any favors to pretend otherwise, at least not African Americans. If the Klan were full of low IQ, self-mutilating retards whom we can safely consider subhuman and thus commit violent acts upon in good conscience, that wouldn't exactly reflect positively on African Americans who were terrorized by them. In general, the Klan is probably one of the most liberally portrayed organizations in the history of the US, which isn't to say that it is, or ever was, entirely peaceful and wholesome either. The Klan has blood on its hands, but in truth, most of us know very little about its history beyond the one-dimensional pop culture narratives about the South. For example, most people have it in their heads that white Southerners were murdering thousands upon thousands of blacks every year, but between 1882 and 1968, according to the NAACP, A grand total of 3,446 lynchings of African Americans occurred in the entire US. Now, to be fair, there were other murders and mutilations committed by the Klan and white Southerners that are not reflected in these figures. A new initiative pulling heavily from the efforts of African American scholar Monroe Work cataloged the total number of African American lynchings at about 5,000 between 1835 and 1964. While no one can claim to have cataloged each and every instance of racial violence in the US during this time span, these figures do give us a general idea of how much lethal vigilante justice occurred in America during this time. In an attempt to account for any lynchings and racial violence not reflected by these figures, let's say that white American mobs and individuals killed about 10,000 African Americans between 1835 and 1968. That's over double any official account that I'm aware of. To put these figures into perspective, African Americans have killed about 324,000 fellow African Americans in the last 35 years alone. That's about 9,000 each year, which suggests the possibility that blacks have murdered just as many blacks in a single year as did the Klan in its entire history between 1866 and 1968. Now, this is not a justification for the lynchings, but Southern violence against blacks has been exaggerated and mythologized to such an extent that rational discussions about it are no longer possible. The Klan came about after the end of the Civil War, when the overwhelming majority of blacks still lived in the South and vastly outnumbered the whites there. What folks truly seeking to understand the situation need to take into account is that within the span of half a decade, white Southerners had all their infrastructure destroyed, their economy was in shambles, and millions of former slaves suddenly outnumbered them and had equal political rights. That's an extreme amount of change that no one in their right mind should expect to go smoothly. Moreover, if you examine areas of the world that have transitioned rapidly from white leadership to black, you can begin to understand a little further why Southern whites reacted the way they did. Black Haitians literally killed all the French when they took over the colony in 1791, including the women and children. The Confederates even cited this as one of their fears of a liberated black population. Again though, this is not an attempt to portray the Klan in a positive light. The point here is to try to understand the motivations of white Southerners beyond the notion that they were just stupid, irrational, inbred trash. Speaking of which, Red Dead Redemption 2 also furthers the myth that there's a high occurrence of incest in the South.
What?
Women's suffrage. Around here, they don't even like men voting. Bring back the monarchy given half the chance. Progress is a dirty word in these parts. Unlike incest.
Excuse me?
I don't want to marry my cousin Matilda. I want to marry Penelope.
Free country? No.
Go away. Stranger, I'd run if I was yous.
We're gonna need to be careful. They're animals. Everyone is terrified of them.
Jesus.
Interestingly, because of frequent first cousin marriages, Pakistanis in the UK account for the majority of defective births there. Jews also have neurological disorders because of their high level of endogamy, and certain Indian groups suffer from high occurrences of diseases due to recessive genes. Moreover, looking at a map showing the distribution of consanguineous marriages throughout the world, it's pretty clear that white countries actually have the least prevalence of it. Yet, it's really only the American South that is continuously portrayed as inbred. Moving on though, in the fictional city of Saint Denis, modeled after New Orleans, there's a eugenicist on the streets ranting about the purity of the white race, and once again, Arthur Morgan feels the need to virtue signal about how all races and ethnicities share the same aggregate potentialities.
Read it. It's really interesting stuff. I explain, using real science, why we whites are under attack, and what we must do to fight back.
Under attack?
Yes, under attack. People aren't the same, sir. I mean, white people are the same. And all the other races are trying to kill us. I don't want to die, sir.
I got friends who's Mexican, friends who's Indian. I've known blacks, Irish, Italians, good and bad and all. I've known good white people and bad white people. And above all, dumb white people.
believe in equality. I've never heard such nonsense in all my natural-born days. This man believes people are equal. Speak for yourself, sir. Speak for yourself.
I'm sorry. You just called me a fool?
A fool! A fool! A fool!
Come here!
Someone help me!
This scene is obviously Rockstar having a go at modern white identity politics. Now, while some of the basic sentiments conveyed here are based on historical fact, the man's behavior is an insincere parody. I'm assuming this character is based off of Madison Grant, who wrote a book in 1916 called The Passing of the Great Race. In it, he articulates concerns over miscegenation, immigration, and declining white birth rates. But nowhere does he express worry that the other races are, quote, trying to kill us. His concern was that unending immigration from non-Nordic countries would inevitably lead to an extinction of America's founding Anglo-Saxon stock and a fractured political landscape. What I find terribly amusing about all this is that while The Atlantic writes articles about how crazy Madison Grant was, the Huffington Post is celebrating white replacement with a tongue-in-cheek video about how terrible whites are going to be treated in 2044 when they're an absolute minority. Now, think what you want about all that, but the consensus in the early 1900s was that Northern Europeans, despite having different cultures and languages, were more or less a genetic stock of people. It's true that in the early 1900s, Franz Boas was fleshing out his own brand of anthropology, but in 1899, both the public and the scientific community overwhelmingly viewed race as a very legitimate concept. It would take Franz Boas and his colleagues a very long time and a lot of scientific fraud to convince the public otherwise. The reality is that this gentleman should not have been presented as some two-bit nutcase on a side street. Views very similar to his own were widely printed in major journals, newspapers, and other publications. Rockstar purposefully depicts him as a weak man forgotten by a progressive society that was moving on, because Rockstar wants to combat the revival of racial science today. Remember, Dan Houser wants to speak to the present elliptically, but not literally. Given the historical context, however, it really is odd that a murdering, bank-robbing petty criminal like Arthur Morgan would feel so strongly about what this fellow was saying. Perhaps this is because Rockstar wanted to convey how morally bankrupt America was by portraying a gang of outlaws as its moral superior. That might explain a lot of things that Dutch van der Linde utters throughout the game.
Hey, Bill, you were a sharpshooter in the cavalry, weren't you?
What?
When we get there, maybe you could help with the suppression fire.
I never said I was no sharpshooter.
Oh, that's right. What was it? The nation's most loyal latrine digger, wasn't that it?
Yeah, well, I fought, and I fought well.
So you always tell us.
Taught me something you could do with learning. Them Indians were savages.
Watch your mouth there, boy. Watch it. Only type of savage in these parts are moonshine, swilling, pompous, inbred locals.
Dutch, I saw things out there.
I don't doubt you saw things, Bill, but your tiny little mind was too small to comprehend what you saw. What you saw was people who lost everything to savagery of peasants. Failures come from Europe to reap some awful vengeance on God's last creation. Without romance, we are nothing but monkeys.
Monkeys?
So the small-minded scientists keep telling us.
Yeah?
The thing is, Dutch is little more than a criminal opportunist who blames society for his own shortcomings as an individual man. Now, it's true that as the story unfolds, Arthur begins to question Dutch's morality, and the writers definitely begin to depict Dutch in a more negative light. For example, it's pretty clear that Dutch is using the plight of Native Americans for his own ends. Initially, I was tempted to view this as an unequivocal vilification of him, and perhaps a wink and a nod to Malcolm X's accusation that white liberals typically use minorities as a political football. But by the end of the game, the writers appear to blame the corruption of Dutch's values on Micah, the gang's blonde-haired, blue-eyed Aryan, who constantly fails at the women in the camp, who insinuates to Lenny that he shot a lot of blacks, and who eventually betrays the group to law enforcement. Now, don't get me wrong, Micah was a creepy piece of shit, but that doesn't mean his character wasn't serving another purpose. In this regard, the vilification of the Pinkertons is notable.
This is my offer, Mr. Morgan. Bring in van der Linde. You have my word, you won't swing.
Well, I ain't gonna swing anyways, Agent.
Milton,
You see, I haven't done anything wrong, aside from not playing the games to your rules.
Spare me the philosophy lesson. I've already heard it from Mac Callender.
Mac Callender?
He was pretty shot up by the time I got to him. So really, it was more of a mercy killing. Slow, but merciful.
You enjoy being a rich man's toy, dear.
I enjoy society, flaws and all. You people venerate savagery, and you will die. Savagely. All of you.
Oh, we're all gonna die, Agent.
Some of us sooner than others. Good day, Mr. Morgan.
Goodbye.
Enjoy your fishing, kid, while you still can.
Now I will show strength, and you may mistake it for brutality. There is no escape for any of you. I shall hunt you to the ends of the earth and the end of time.
This is not to say that the Pinkertons did no wrong, or that the robber barons were without sin. The Pinkertons often busted up unions and worker demonstrations, while the robber barons monopolized the free market. But it's one thing to discuss the shortcomings of law enforcement and market monopoly, and it's another to portray a gang of communistic criminal outlaws as their moral superior. The game also demonizes the father of Arthur's love interest, Mary Linton, because he viewed Arthur as a reject unfit for his daughter. The story tries to justify this by making the father and family turn into degenerates themselves, thereby promoting the idea that life is entirely a crapshoot and random, that Mary's family was really no better than Arthur, and that her father had no right to judge him or to try to influence Mary's marital decisions. Now, in European societies, a woman should definitely have the final say in whom she marries, but it's a father's duty to impart in his daughter a set of values and morals that will enable her to choose a good husband. Arthur Morgan was a common thug, and Mary's father had every right to be wary of his daughter's infatuation with him. To give credit where credit is due, however, Mary was actually raised pretty well by her father, insofar that while she was attracted to Arthur's bad boy personality and chiseled jawline, she refrained from marrying him. Even after becoming infatuated with him a second time later in life, she resisted his allure once more and saw him for what he was. But I think the writers did this to gain sympathy for Arthur rather than to celebrate a woman making the right long-term decision because of her father's influence. In fact, the writers try very hard to get the audience to feel sympathy for Arthur and several other members of the gang, save for Micah, Bill, Pearson, and Kieran. While Arthur is constantly making fun of, antagonizing, or berating the former individuals, he always seems to be praising Lenny, Charles, and Javier.
When I was in the Navy,
I do not wish to hear about what you got up to in the Navy, Mr. Pearson.
we were stranded at sea for 50 days.
And you unfortunately survived.
Thing. Keeps you sane, it does.
Yes, seems to have done a treat on you. You go rest that hand, Charles.
You'll be fine in a few days.
Might help.
Shit! Give me a drink or something!
Get your own damn drink!
In our absence, Mrs. Adler here has been looking after things. Now sit down.
Who'd have thought it? Wasn't that long ago I was tied to the back of your horse while begging for mercy. Now we're off fishing together.
How do you know I ain't just looking for a good place to drown you?
Because I saved your life, Arthur.
You keep saying that, but I save your life every day I don't kill you. So we are more than even on that front.
Come on, you don't mean that.
You better believe I mean it.
The rivers around here, famous for the smallmouth bass. Fella I met showed me a couple spots. You want to join me?
I can't fish with you. You're far too good.
Oh, come on, come on. Hey, join me. I'll show you a couple of my tricks.
We know what you do for this gang. We notice. Keep it up. You're gonna start seeing things change for you.
Okay, then. Okay.
Hey, I always enjoy riding with you, kid. You know how to fight.
Hey, you too. Anytime, Arthur.
Now, to be fair, the attempt to portray anyone in the gang as a victim came off really odd. Arthur continuously speaks of the fact that civilization is encroaching on their way of life, and that society doesn't want people like them anymore. But when exactly did society want people like the Vanderlyn gang running around? Sure, occasionally the story alludes to how they rob from the rich and give to the poor in a cringy attempt to appear as virtuous Robin Hood types, But honestly, I felt far more sympathy for the folks they were robbing from and killing than I did for them. All I could ever think about were the coal miners, the farmers, the store clerks, and all the other American working folks who had their own hardships to deal with, but who never resorted to criminal enterprise to solve them. By the end of the game, I really didn't like anybody in the Vanderling gang. I really did appreciate the epilogue, insofar that it was pleasant to watch John Marston become a responsible father, and I also enjoyed Abigail's sense of satisfaction once she was able to build her family a proper nest. The thing is, instead of working hard to pay off his debt, John uses the money from his gang's robbery in Blackwater to buy out his ranch from the bank. While I'm not exactly a big fan of how banks operate or how they've engaged in usury, this doesn't exactly justify John Marston's behavior. While other men in the game literally died as they tried to live honestly, John Marston got ahead in life by stealing. In the end, he was just as big of a parasite as the slightly well-to-do folk he and Dutch often resented, and everything John got in the end was because other people suffered. The whole presentation of Abigail and John's redemption is one that suggests to people that you can just go around whoring and robbing your whole life and still fix things in the end. And if you can't, then, well, it's because civil society is cruel and won't let you start over with your new wholesome life of family values with all that money you stole. In fact, the game regularly obfuscates morality by behaving as if one act is as meaningless as the next. Take for example how Sadie Adler and John Marston discuss the ambiguity of bounty hunting.
It's an odd thing, isn't it? We'll take $200 from a sheriff who might be crooked himself to go get a bounty, but we won't take $2,000 from an outlaw just to let him go.
If that kind of offer is tempting to you, then go right ahead. But not when you're on one of my jobs.
I never said I was tempted by it. I just said it was an odd thing. How we'd take money from one but not the other.
Everyone's got to choose what they're loyal to. Themselves, God, the state. If a bounty hunter wants to last, the loyalty's got to be to the one that's issuing the bounties. Plain and simple. I got a reputation for honest work.
So, everyone with a price on their head deserves it, you think?
Sure. No, I don't know. Usually, if I got into who deserved what, second-guessed every poster, I'd tear out all my hair before I put a rope on anyone. If the price is high enough, you got to trust there's a reason they said it.
I hope that rationale works out for all of us.
Perhaps it's an odd thing to John because, at his core, he's a man with no sense of moral responsibility to society at large. The fact that he's confused about this at all is really quite telling, and ironically gives some credit to the concerns of the eugenics movement. John Marston's father was a drunk who was blinded in a bar fight, and his mother was a prostitute, and Jack, their son, despite everyone's best efforts, didn't escape the cycle in his family either. That's 3 generations of social delinquency, so in the end, Arthur died trying to save John so that John could save his son, who ultimately became just like his father. Now, I'm not a proponent of eugenics myself, but I don't deny the validity of its underpinnings, and I find it comical that Rockstar's story makes a concerted effort to condemn it, while their characters' behavior often supports it. In any event, one of the reasons that Western society has thrived until now is because we've had strong religious and cultural institutions that put pressure on these types of folks who were predisposed to criminality. And interestingly, Rockstar repeatedly trashes Christianity.
Have I been bad again, Mr. Morgan? I'm sorry. I wish I was different.
You ain't the first to put his hand in the collection box, and you won't be the last. Rests a little easier knowing church has been taking more than they need off poor folks since time began.
Hello.
Hello. What do you want?
I'm not quite sure. Oh.
I'm not coping very well with life, my friend. He won't send me the message. He won't. I've been here for years, and nothing.
Now, to be fair, the church is painted in a somewhat positive light at times, but it's conspicuously only when a monk asks Arthur to help him free some Latino slaves from an underground market, or when the church is represented by a black woman. So for me, Rockstar's view of Christianity varied based on whatever narrative they wanted to prioritize at the moment. So, is there an overarching message within Red Dead Redemption 2? Most people will say no, and that I'm a total Nazi nutjob for having made this video, but more often than not, the game is highly partial to a critical perspective of America and of the Europeans who built it, while it generally refrains from criticizing or satirizing the historical involvement of non-whites in a negative way. That said, the narratives in the game stack up on top of each other in a very particular way. Dutch van der Linde is initially praised for his ideals, but later condemned for his betrayal of them. On one hand, this could be Rockstar showcasing how the behavior of white liberals' self-delusional and sometimes disingenuous behavior can add up to a net negative for the minorities and outcasts they claim to champion. On the other hand, Dutch, Arthur, and John never truly escaped their past. Just as Rainsfall said, men never really change, but rather become more of who they are. Through its satirical commentaries and exposés, Red Dead Redemption 2 says as much about white America, that it was built on a rotten foundation, and that there's probably no redemption for it. Even within the tiniest nooks and crannies of the game, there are often details that tend to support this conclusion. The game also, without much question, promotes moral particularism and nihilism, but interestingly, only up until matters of race and sex enter the equation. Sadie Adler once told John Marston that we all have to decide what we're loyal to in the end, suggesting that it really doesn't matter what we're loyal to, it just matters that we're loyal to something. But what if some of us decide that we're loyal to race, ethnicity, and traditionalism? Would Rockstar ever portray such behavior as being morally inconsequential?